Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Leah Toms from the marketing team, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. We'll be talking about PQC readiness today. Together with Omdia, we surveyed 272 IT decision makers from medium to large enterprises across the world, and today we're here to share the findings with you. And for that, I have Tim Callan, Chief Compliance Officer, and Jason Sirocco, Senior Fellow, here for you today. As always, this presentation is being recorded and we'll share with you after the session. If you've got any questions during the presentation, send them our way. Please use the Q&A function for that, and we'll answer as many questions as we can at the end. But with this, over to you, Tim and Jason.
Thank you, Leah. How are you doing today, Jason?
Great, Tim.
Great. So first of all, we're going to include just a little bit of context so this makes sense. What's going on with post-quantum cryptography and what's happening, but we're going to give the bulk of the agenda today to talking about the actual findings from the research. And I'll put a couple, I don't want to say caveats, but a couple clarifiers on the research. One of which is when we get there, we are going to talk about exactly how we screened and who we screened for. So you know who we're talking about and who we're not talking about. And then the second piece that's connected to that is there is more than this. So we don't have time to go over all the research in a limited time webinar like this one. And so we're going to point you to the asset where you can see all the questions and analysis of all the questions. What we did today was we picked out what we thought were probably the most generally interesting bits for the most people by our judgment. And those are the ones we're going to talk about today. Does that sound good, Jason?
Sounds great, Tim.
All right, so let's dive into it. So the first thing to understand is what's going on and what does the timeline look like for quantum computing? So next slide, please. Quantum computing has moved out of the realm of being an interesting theoretical idea and very much into the realm of being real engineering projects with real results. And I would say not just real progress, but would you agree, Jason, to say accelerating progress, right?
I think what we can absolutely say, Tim, is steady acceleration that is proven by the engineering, and that's what's remarkable, and that's the big change.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I don't think that there is a serious thinker today who is going to be able to make a case that quantum computers aren't really coming, aren't going to be a legitimate, commercially viable and practical technology that will be loosed upon the world for widespread usage, and that this is going to happen in the relatively near future. So, exactly, what does it look like in 2030 versus what does it look like in 2032 is still unclear. But we're not talking about 2050 here, right? And that part, I think, also has become perfectly clear. And so with that, and with new quantum milestones being announced, all the time, one of the things that we've received is received guidance from NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, which really has led the charge globally on dealing with the post-quantum cryptography threat. We've seen guidance from NIST to say that you need to deprecate your use of traditional RSA and ECC algorithms by 2030. Now that isn't very far away, is it, Jason?
And it's in terms of technology cycles, for some people it feels like forever because you have problems you're dealing with right now. But in terms of the overall scope, you won't believe how fast that's going to come to.
Yeah, and so part of what we're going to talk about here is what does this look like for you in terms of what do you need to be doing and when in order to make those states. But let's go ahead and move on. And so a lot of what the research was about was what was the preparedness, right? What does the average enterprise look like? And, spoiler, the answer is they're still in the very, very early stages. All right, the drivers of PQC. Next slide, please. So why is this happening at all? Jason, I guess we kind of hit on this already, but why is this happening at all?
Tim, what's amazing about this is what I think people are not getting. This is where, for people who don't have the awareness yet, to make it as simple as possible, the current cryptographic algorithms that are used, especially for data encryption in transit, those key cryptographic algorithms that we've used for decades, not just 1 decade or 2, but like 3 decades, Tim, or more, those are being deprecated in 2030, and for good reason. It's because the quantum computers, along with some very clever algorithms, are going to be able to factorize those. And the solution we've had in the past, Tim, which was just to make the signatures bigger, use larger key lengths, that isn't going to work this time. We have to fundamentally change the way that these algorithms work.
Yeah, and to be clear, there's guidance and requirements coming down saying people must do that, and those are good reasons to do it. But the reasons behind the guidance isn't just because a bunch of people had nothing better to do and decided to put together some guidance. It's because in the absence of these changes, there is a very strong risk to our important secrets inside of our organizations. All right,
Tim, I think, go ahead, Tim. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to move to the next slide. So go ahead and say it, Jay.
Right. So it's that great slide about crypto agility. I think there's one last thing to mention, which is even though we do have new quantum resistant cryptographic algorithms that have been proposed, standardized, and are with us, Tim, there are more coming. And I think what it might be surprising to people is that 3-decade plus lifespan of cryptographic algorithms is probably something we're never going to see again, which is why cryptographic agility is now as important as other things that you need to have agility for. And I think that's the surprising message.
Absolutely right, Jason. Like we need to understand that there will be an ongoing need to update our cryptography on a regular cadence. And I could easily see that be as short as just a few years. And so we need to have systems and processes that allow for that.
Yep.
All right, moving on to the next slide. And so these are some of the ways that we need to change, right? Hard-coded algorithms need to be replaced by fundamentally agile, updatable algorithms, architectures, including the possibility for hybrid usage, where we're using more than one algorithm at the same time. We're watching certificate lifespans drop down, getting shorter and shorter. We're on the path to monthly renewal of service certificates. By way of example, management, the days of automated management and big spreadsheets of certificates, especially for servers, really are going away. And this isn't going to work in a monthly kind of renewal cadence. And in that kind of environment, again, imagine something that's automated and agile so that you don't have all that human error-prone work being done. Fast updates, support quantum-ready algorithms. I think all of those make sense, right? This is the world. We're moving from the left column to the right column. Yeah. All right. And one of the things that's yoked to this conversation, and we'll turn to this at the end, is that the reduction in certificate lifespan, the upcoming march down to 47-day maximum term, and the immediate, like the March 25th, 2026 drop down to 6 months terms by way of example, is going to be a beneficiary to the certificate, the agility and the resilience we're looking for with these other, for our PQC. So, though there are reasons to drop down to month-long certificate renewals that are beyond PQC, PQC will be a direct beneficiary of these changes, and the two of them are interwoven.
Tim, I think that one of the concepts to talk about here is the one that's at the very top, which is the taking of inventory and knowing very intimately where all of your certificates are and what you're using. And
Right.
that is important for both dealing with the shorter certificate lifespan problem as well as ultimately quantum resilience.
All right, so why don't we go to the next slide? Okay, all right, yeah, okay, the State of Crypto Agility Report. All right, so let's go into it. So let's talk a little bit about this report. So we talked about, I think Leah said at the top of the session that we did have an N value of 272. They were scattered, they were spread across North America, Europe, and rest of the world. So a little bit about who this is. These are not just IT decision makers, but decision makers who are responsible for certificates and certificate management. So we really wanted the people who are in the world of certificates, because IT can mean a lot of things, and there's not a lot of value in talking to somebody who doesn't really know what the enterprise is doing. Along the same lines, we did limit this to companies of 1,000 employees or more. So we really tried to understand what Gardner would call a small up to large enterprise would do in terms of their approach. And we also screened, and this is an important one, for titles we screened director or up. And then the main thing we screened for, and this is important, is that there needed to be a minimum basic knowledge of PQC. And the reason for that is we did not want to get a bunch of people who just answered, I don't know. We wanted to get the people who actually know. So we needed to get people who are aware of PQC, knew what it was, and had some kind of plan or idea for how to move forward. And if they didn't have that, we screened them out. And so that absolutely does change potentially the nature of some of this information. But again, we didn't want to just get people who didn't know anything about it. And so with those qualifiers, let's go ahead and let's start looking at the results. And let me say again, there were we're only going to look at about half the questions today because there just isn't space. But we have a document that you can go back to, that we basically have a white paper that has the results in chart form and some analysis of every single question in the survey. So if this is interesting to you, you can go and you can find out much more about the state of where enterprises are with PQC. So first question. NIST has signaled the deprecation of RSA 2048 and ECC 256 by 2030. Were you previously, as in other words, not before you got this survey, aware of this change? And there were actually 3 results here. There was the 2 you see here, yes, fully aware and heard of it, but not familiar with the details. And then there was a third one, which is no, I wasn't. And that was a screener question. So those people were screened out who say, no, I wasn't. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at the breakup of the people that you're going to see who answered the following questions. And what I'll observe about this one, Jason, is that more than half of these people who made it past the screener, they knew that there was something, but they don't even here, they don't really know the specifics and they don't really know what they're dealing with. And I think this is one of the things we're going to see throughout this survey, is that this is a very new story and there's a lot of need for information. Do you agree?
Tim, I'm going to put this into 3 words.
Okay.
Awareness is low.
Yes.
And because remember, you've now described perfectly the fact that we've screened out people who didn't know anything. I think one of the things that we're not saying here, but we can say, is that overall awareness, like people who are aware at all, is a tiny minority.
Yeah.
And when this question is really trying to show us, even if people have heard of it, the familiarity with the details is far from ubiquitous. It is,
Yeah.
the awareness is low.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yes. All right. So moving on. So now we start getting into the specifics of what people knew to get ready for PQC. So look at this one. Has your organization conducted an assessment of systems vulnerable to quantum computing attacks? Right? Our yes fully, and again, this is already among this kind of elite subset of enterprises. The yes fully is only at 14%. Partially is 46%, I think that says, and planning to do so, haven't done anything, 40%. So, fortunately, nobody's saying they're not planning at all. But what are your thoughts on this, Jason?
I think that this again shows, we're at the very early stages of all of
Yeah,
this, Tim.
yeah,
That's what it is.
yeah, absolutely. And, even planning to do so in the next 12 months doesn't mean it really happens, right? That's just a plan, and it might not have actual resources committed to it. And the day-to-day might come along and get in its way. And these are all real things that could be roadblocks. All right, next slide, please. All right, and here we go. Do you have budget allocated to quantum safe security initiatives over the next year? So I find this to be really encouraging, right? 90% said yes. That's good, right? That means that people really do intend to do something about it.
It probably is one of the most encouraging answers
Mhm.
we have in the entire set. So we've just seen that awareness is low, but I think, Tim, what's interesting is once awareness occurs, it triggers things. And that's
Yes.
very encouraging.
Yes, and we'll do another webinar in the future. As part of this survey, we also researched preparedness for the step down to 47-day certificates, and we'll cover that in a separate webinar, you and I. But I think you and I observed when we looked at these results that that's one of the things where you see a disparity, right? Where the enterprise's galvanization, that's the word, around this particular need is actually pretty high. Awareness is low, but among people who are aware, there is a commitment to do something. And that seems to be, when we get to some later results, it's probably more about guidance from credible organizations than anything else. But yeah, budget, 90% have budget allocated. That's a lot. Next slide, please. And that's expected to grow over time, right? And I wouldn't have, obviously the survey had everything in here because it needs to, right? Significantly increase somewhat, stay the same, and then decreases at 0, right? This is what I would expect for something that's very early in its days, which is they have some budget allocated, but they don't really have big budget allocated. They have little baby budgets allocated. And what they need to do now moving forward is they need to get better budgets as they understand even what they need to do, right? Because remember, a lot of people don't even have a plan yet.
That's exactly right, Tim. I think that once people feel the full scope of what's going on and probably the interrelatedness of other projects that they need to take on,
Yeah.
that will probably expand what they're doing. And so
Yeah.
again, early awareness, but it triggers action once people understand.
Right. And I think that's an interesting point, the interrelatedness. And this will come back. We're going to return once again to the topic of 47-day certificates and some other changes that are going on in the certificate landscape, because a lot of what's required for these is extremely similar. There's a lot of overlap in the Venn diagram. And so I'm predicting and I'm imagining that organizations are going to use the same work to accomplish more than one of these important looming requirements that they have. Right. But yes, budget's going up. Next slide, please. All right. So what are your top priorities? I think maybe let's look at what's at the top, right? And kind of compare that to what's at the bottom. What do we have up at the top? Risk assessments or impact analysis, inventory and of cryptographic assets, research and evaluation of PQC algorithms. What do we have down at the bottom? Pilot projects, vendor engagement, training and upskilling internal teams. So what's the difference here, right? The stuff at the top is very early planning and information finding kind of stuff. These are organizations that have identified they need to do something, but don't really know what they need to do, right? They don't have a project plan, they're making a project plan. And the things with low numbers down at the bottom, those are the things that are done by organizations that are executing. So what we see now is very little execution going on and a whole lot of figuring it out going on.
It's early days, Tim.
Yeah.
It's early days. And I really think, again, I've said this before now, maybe a couple times, but this report doesn't really show just the rarity of people who are aware, and even those who are aware, the total awareness and total planning is at very early stages.
Yeah. And so, excuse me, I think it'll be interesting to see what this looks like in a year, right?
Oh, yeah.
It'll be interesting to track this one. A bunch of these will be interesting to track year over year, right? It'll be interesting to see what this looks like this time next year, to see if these numbers have shifted in a meaningful way. All right, next slide, please. So, which best describes your organization's current approach? Again, it's kind of interesting to look at what's at the top and what's at the bottom, right? The top one, gradual phase in. We go down to the bottom one, complete system overhaul. Now, I think a complete system overhaul, honestly, that's insanely tough. Like even if someone thinks that that's what their approach is going to be, I'm skeptical that that's practical, right? So something like a gradual phase in doesn't surprise me. Again, especially for new technology need that a year ago they probably hadn't even identified, where they haven't made firm plans, have tiny budgets which they're going to have to grow over time, and they're in kind of information discovery phase. So at this point, yeah, what are they going to do? They're going to dip their toes in the water. This is we're going to dip our toes in the water kind of response here with the gradual phase in. We're going to implement some things and we're going to see how they go. Right?
That's it, Tim. This is expected. If it's true that things were at early days, I think this chart probably shows that better than anything else.
Yeah. So yeah. All right. So moving on. Oh, and we don't have a strategy yet, right? That's another option. Okay. So one of the most interesting factors. So this one I think is really interesting. Again, especially if we compare the top to the bottom, right? Look at the top. Preparing for the NIST algorithm deprecation of RSA 2048 and ECC. Proactively preparing to meet upcoming standards and new government mandates. Those are the top two. Now let's look down what's at the bottom. Actual pragmatic things. Client partner is required to explore quantum safe strategies. Harvest and decrypt mitigation, right? So at the top, at the bottom, we have threats. at the top, and I actually think there's one that might even that fell off the very bottom of this, which is we had a close call. I think that's not sitting. I think that maybe is not sitting on this in this chart. We can look at the real thing, but I think when you look at the bottom, we have things like mitigate, harvest, and decrypt, and we had a close call, and these are real things that are real pragmatic attacks. When you look at the top, what do we have? We have guidance. We have standards. We have people are doing this work because they've been told they must by credible sources. And I find this very interesting, right? That the PQC adoption is being driven not by our own assessment of risks and our own desire to minimize risk. Rather, it's by our desire to be compliant with someone else that we deem to be credible or who we think we must follow, who has told us that this is a risk we need to mitigate. What do you think of that, Jay?
This might be a function of the type of people that were targeted or were answering these questions. But it is absolutely fascinating to me that something as dire as harvest and decrypt or breaches themselves, are as low as they are compared to, as you said, Tim, the being compelled to make sure that you're compliant with NIST guidance. And
right, it's interesting, right?
It's very interesting.
Like at the end of the day, the risk is the real driver, right? The reason that we wear seatbelts in our cars is because if we get in an accident, we're less likely to be hurt or killed if we have a seatbelt on. Now, there's a law that says we must wear the seatbelt, but that law is driven by this fundamental safety concern. And so here, the fundamental safety concern exists, but it's not the driver of the behavior. The driver of the behavior is the law, right? To use my analogy, the driver of the behavior is the guideline. I find that really interesting. And, I've been thinking about this for a couple weeks now. And I think where I fall down on this is, I think, again, this is because it's such an early thing that people haven't had a chance to evaluate and make sense of their own level of risk. Right? They haven't had a chance to say, hey, what does harvest and decrypt mean to me? Right? But they know that NIST says we have to do it, or they know they have a regulation that they have to do it.
What keeps echoing here, Tim, is awareness is low, because if it were higher, this chart would look different.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's a fair observation. All right, next, please. What involvement do the following stakeholders have in PQC decisions at your organization? So what's interesting here, okay, so it's just how to read this, right? The further right that bar is, the more involved that somebody is, right? So final decision maker is way over the right, then contributors next to it, etc. So if you look at the top one or the top two, who do we see up at the top? The CIO and the security crypto architects. So this is being driven by security professionals. This is a security initiative, right? And this is interesting because, what you and I know, having lived in this world a lot, Jason, is that normally when you're talking about certificates and certificate management, the people you're talking to are operational. They're in ops or infrastructure or something like that. And that's or the office of the CIO. And that's who you kind of expect to be driving a certificate initiative. But this is different. It's got a different set of players. We have designated security professionals that really are behind this. And this means that we have people involved in this conversation who usually just plain aren't.
Yeah, my hope, Tim, is that the higher on the rung that the leadership is that is paying attention to this, I think those are going to be the organizations that have the most level of success. People who are operationalizing this, it's going to involve the entire company. But the people who are driving it, and as this question asks, right, have PQC decision making. I'm glad to see that it's a different mix, but I'm even more glad to see that there's a lot of people in higher positions within the
Yeah.
organization. This has to be a top-down driven exercise.
Sure, it does, because it touches everything, right? And I think you also see that things like the CEO, right? Or the CTO, right? The CTO is a contributor, right? So that makes sense in that regard, because it's going to touch everything in the organization. And I think having the security team at the table, this is new. It's been a long time since you've really had a CIO, or sorry, a CISO as your, primary driver for this kind of initiative. And this is healthy. I'm glad to see security professionals sitting up and paying attention and viewing this as something that they need to do, instead of saying, oh, that's the operation team's problem to solve.
Yeah, Tim, you know as well as I do, quite often CISOs and organizations, nobody wants to hear from them, because whenever they have to be heard from, it's when things are going very bad. So if they're being involved in planning stages of something so important, that's hugely positive and beneficial.
Yeah, agreed. All right, next. So, challenges, right? Again, let's kind of look at the stuff at the top, right? It's interesting. Coordination across teams, system complexity, right? What do we see when we look at those two things? We see what we were just talking about. This touches the whole organization. This is something where anything that isn't made PQC compatible, anything that isn't made quantum resilient, is going to be an attack surface. And so changing all of your cryptography across your entire organization and all your systems while the car is moving, to use the analogy people like to use, is a major undertaking.
It's major, Tim.
And we see that reflected here, right?
Never mind actual changes. Just taking cryptographic asset inventory, Tim, requires coordination across teams. And this is not something that we've seen at this level. PQC is going to force silos to come down within organizations. I think a lot of us think that the silos were gotten rid of years ago. The silos are just as big as they ever were, and those are going to have to come down to some level in order to be able to solve PQC. And we see it on this chart.
Yeah, I agree. We see it on this chart. And stuff that's down at the bottom is very kind of pragmatic stuff. Production systems failure, lack of available HSMs, performance trade-offs and impacts, right? That's not the big problem. The big problem isn't those simple practical things. The big problem is the sweeping nature of it, and the fact that it touches everything and the complexity that comes with that. All right, next slide, please. What barriers do you expect to experience during PQC implementation with your legacy systems? What do we see? Same thing, integration complexity is the top one on the list. Number 3 on the list is compatibility issues. I mean, it's not surprising that downtime is a big one, but integration complexity, compatibility issues, 2 of the top 3. And these are talking about the same thing, I think, that we talked about before. What do we see down at the bottom? Performance constraints and degradation, organizational resistance to change. So these are not the things that's holding us up. The thing that's holding us up that are going to be barriers are that this is going to be hard, and this is going to be complex, and this is going to touch everything. Now, this is expectation, right? So it could be that when they actually implement it, their opinions change. But this shows what the attitudes are, what the expectations are right now. All right. How confident are you in your current system's ability to integrate PQC without major disruption? I thought this was really interesting, right? You're extremely confident and very confident. Your top two there is a mere 38%. So a little over a third have a high degree of confidence. Nearly 2/3 do not, right? They're not holding a high degree of confidence that they can integrate PQC without a major disruption. So there's a lot of worry about our ability to do this.
Yeah, Tim, it's made so clear on the graphic. I remember
Right.
when you and I first looked at this question together, it was just so clear that there is much less confidence than more confidence. And
Yeah.
it does reflect the early nature of
Yeah.
understanding.
Yeah. Now, so in full disclosure, there is a not at all confident that nobody picked. That's 0%. So it's not on the pie chart. So we should know that. But still, I think that just when you look at this, for something like avoiding major disruption, to have 1/3 of them having a pretty high degree of confidence that that's something they're going to be able to avoid speaks to a great deal of anxiety around implementing PQC and how we're going to do it and how we're going to do it successfully. So those were the ones we cherry picked. Again, that's about half of them. So get the full report if you want to see the rest. Also, this is Jason's and my take on it. You can scrutinize these charts and decide if you agree. Maybe you have a different take. And so all of these, like all of these, a whole bunch of these, I think are going to be very interesting to track over time, right? And to see how these things change over time. You know, capsule summary, I think it's what you said, Jay. We're looking at this is exactly what you would expect for very early days, low awareness. We've just become alerted within the last year that this is something we need to do at all. We're doing that not coming out of a holistic internal knowledge about the threats and the technology and how it works, rather about external guidance that's been given to us. And based on this, now we're sort of figuring out, gosh, what do we need to do, right? And we're cracking our knuckles and sitting and figuring this out right now. When I look at this, this is what I see. This is what the enterprise is doing today in 2025 in terms of PQC. And so let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. I think we've probably moved that. And so that's a big one. Now, we talked, I think, about how does this tie into 47 days. So we're going to go over those results, as I said, at a different webinar. But I think it's valuable, just in case anybody isn't aware of the fact, there is an existing CA browser forum initiative. It's ballot. It's a rule. It's happening that the maximum certificate term is going to decrease in stages down to the point where in March 15, 2029, the maximum term is going to be 47 days, which basically is intended to be a 1-month renewal cadence. And starting in March 15 of next year, it's going to go down to maximum term is 200 days, which is intended to be a 6-month renewal cadence with some, wiggle room in there, right? The year after that, 100 days is a 3-month cadence with some wiggle room in there. So that's the step down that you see is occurring here. And this is interesting and important because what do we need? What are we going to need to be able to accomplish this step down without massive outages, Jay?
Oh, Tim, I honestly think that after 398 days is past us, I think that when certificate lifespan, the maximum certificate lifespan gets to 200, 147 days,
Yeah.
we have entered the era where we're past the threshold where manually renewing certificates makes sense.
Yeah.
I truly believe that automation is the only
I
solution to
agree.
this.
We need agility, we need automation, we need a full command and understanding of the certificates we have. We need a comprehensive cryptographic bill of material. We need all of the exact same thing, that exact same list for the migration to post-quantum cryptography. And this is where it's interesting, where you see these two initiatives that in theory are entirely independent, have a massive overlay in the Venn diagram of the work that must be done, of the how we get there. And so that's why this is an important part of the story. And I think part of what I want to say here, and I know you agree with me, Jay, is enterprises that are considering these initiatives separately in silos are probably doing themselves a disservice. Because what you have to do to account for both of these needs, and they are both external needs that are coming, that are beyond our control, that are going to happen, that we have to adjust for. And if we don't, we're taking on risk. So as we account for these needs and minimize our risk, there's going to be they're going to be so interwoven in terms of what we need to do, and there's so much repeat work in what we need to do that the best practice is to fuse them, maybe not into one project, but at least have the two projects sitting side by side so you can see and understand them. And definitely the best practice is to have a meeting of minds of the owners, because one of the earlier slides we saw said that the security professionals are the drivers behind this. I think that's great. It's very different, though, than the drivers behind preparing for the 47-day certificates, which really are operational people. And so you've got a set of operational people who know they need to do this and a set of security people who know they need to do this. Let's make sure those people are talking. Let's make sure that they're sharing information, sharing effort, sharing roadmap, sharing budget, and that it's one effort, not two.
Keeping inventory, Tim, is something that's absolutely natural for security professionals. All cybersecurity problems start with inventory taking.
Yeah.
I think for operational people, inventory taking is important, but it's done in a siloed manner. And for everybody else in the organization, it's something that might be new to them. This is where everything collapses together. The taking of inventory, that this ability to have basically an overarching visibility to not just the scope of the issue, but also where your crown jewels are. That's the nexus point between all of this. And Tim, I think the 47-day issue, as well as the post-quantum issue, that is where the Venn diagram is absolutely the most overlapped.
Yeah, and one of the questions we didn't include here, which of course now I'm going to talk about it anyway, which means we might as well have included it, is we asked them, how much overlap do you see between PQC initiatives you're doing and certificate lifespan step down initiatives? And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the answer was a great deal, right? The answer to the question, and we'll make a point of including that in the follow-on, the 47-day webinar, is that there was a lot, and people were really clear on the fact that they saw a great deal of overlap between these two initiatives, which is good, I think.
Yep.
Right, which I'm glad about. Next slide, please. So why are we doing 40? Let's hit this real quick. Why are we doing 40? Why are certificate lifespans getting shorter at all? They're just getting shorter fundamentally because they're safer. If you have a shorter certificate, then your risk surface, if there's a misissuance or a key compromise or abuse of a certificate or something like that, abuse of a domain name, All of those things, if you've got shorter lived certs, the opportunity for bad things to be done, the risk goes down, right? Pure and simple. And then fundamentally, they're supportive of lots of other best practices. They help us with crypto agility. They help us. They help drive use of automation. They help with things like zero trust architecture. So all of these things benefit from shorter certificate lifespans. Next slide, please. And so when you start to thinking about this, we're going to be talking about automation, right? Automation, you already said, Jason, automation, right? And so automation brings us a bunch of benefits. So there's reduced risk of outage, which is one of the ones we talk about a lot because outages are very expensive. But let's just not ignore the fact that just plain it's much more efficient with the humans, right? That your humans can get their jobs done in much less time. And because they get their jobs done in much less time, you have more of their time to work on other things. You can get new initiatives that otherwise you wouldn't be able to do, right? And you can add things to your roadmap and deliver things that otherwise you wouldn't be able to deliver. Automation also helps with things like visibility and reporting, and therefore things like compliance and security, because these things come with visibility and support. So when you put all of that together, there are a lot of benefits for automation, and it's more than just, not missing a renewal, although that's a huge one, or not having the certificate installed incorrectly, although that's a huge one too, right? It's also this human efficiency and this basic compliance posture. Next. Automation options. Acme is a big one to look at. For service certificates, definitely you want to be looking at Acme. There are other options too, EST and SCAP and internal APIs and things along those lines. But think really hard. Acme support is very broad, very general. Think very hard about going for something that's going to give you Acme support. And next. All right. So I mentioned this, right? We do have our State of Crypto Agility report that Sectigo did, and again, Omdio did the research and provided analysis to us. And then we created the report based on that. So you can get the full report. You can see all the results to all the questions. And this includes the PQC component of it and also the 47-day component. So you can go get it all in the same report. That's available from Sectigo. I think we're going to send you a link afterwards. And then the other thing I just have to show, I always have to show, next slide, please, that if you're interested in this kind of thing, Jason and I run a podcast called Root Causes. And Root Causes, you can find it on, wherever you listen to podcasts. Root Causes focuses on certificates, encryptions, PKI, and things along those lines. It's a PKI, Digital Certificate, Digital Identity podcast. And we have new episodes every week, and we would love to have you come join us. And you can learn about, all sorts of topics like this there. And with that, I think we're ready for questions.
Great. And yeah, just to confirm, we'll send out that report in the follow-up email alongside the recording. The first question that's come in is, how do shorter certificate lifespans help prevent against harvest now and decrypt later attacks?
Well, shorter certificate lifespans are not directly related to harvest and decrypt. Harvest and decrypt is really about PQC. The shorter certificates are beneficial to security overall, because in the event there is a compromise or a misissuance, the total risk of something happening with that goes down. Harvest and decrypt, as it happens, is really mitigated with PQC.
Thank you. Earlier in the webinar, we talked about budgets. Can you tell us what organizations generally budget for? Is that more on the inventory side or also doing actual replacement work? Do you know?
I think that question was not asked, but Jason, what do you think?
Tim, I think that right now, I know that some organizations are definitely looking overall at legacy systems that they know are just going to have to be changed in short order.
Yeah.
I think that that's the top of the list right now is what is the low-hanging fruit for change that will give you the agility that you just wouldn't have otherwise. There are going to be lots of other budget needing processes and projects, but that's the top one, Tim.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Like that's worth just taking a few seconds on. A lot of organizations have systems in place that aren't really updatable. Perhaps that's because it's an unsupported product from a vendor. Perhaps it's because it's something they made themselves and they don't really have the pragmatic capacity to just stick a bug fix in for whatever reason. The code's not understood, build environment doesn't exist anymore, etc. And so you may have been getting away with that, and you may have been getting away with that for a long time. But with both of these things we're talking about, with shorter certificate lifespans and also with PQC, your ability to get away with that goes down. Because if you can't upgrade your algorithms to PQC, it's just an attack surface, pure and simple. And if you're not willing to absorb that attack risk, then you're going to have to figure out how to get that stuff into a current, patchable, upgradable state.
Thank you. Once existing algorithms break, what will happen?
Well, the most immediate thing that's going to happen is, and this is already going on right now, the way the harvest and decrypt attack works is well-resourced attackers. A well-resourced attacker, if they get inside your network, one of the things that most of us do is we use a defense in depth strategy. And part of our defense in depth strategy is that stuff's encrypted. So even if someone gets into your network, they can't spy on your communication because it's all going through encrypted channels. So they can't read it. However, what the harvest and decrypt attack says is it says, well, I don't have to read it. All I have to do is capture it. I can just capture the blobs, unintelligible as they are, and store them in, well-indexed, well-tagged files. And then someday in the future, when I have access to a quantum computer, I can go in priority order and start opening those files and figure out what they are. Or I know perfectly well what they are, and I know it has the secret, I just can't read the secret. Now I'll be able to open it up and read the secret. And the thing is, once somebody owns those files, and once a quantum computer is an inevitability, then it's just a matter of time until they open that. And that's the harvest and decrypt attack in a nutshell. And so this is why it's important for us to upgrade our cryptography quickly, because the sooner we get those upgrades in place, the sooner we prevent those blobs from being stored that one day in the future will be used against us. And that's the first line of attack. You can imagine things down the road where real-time man-in-the-middle attacks are occurring, and that's something to be aware of. But right now, harvest and decrypt and the connected attack, which is the trust now, forge later attack, which kind of does the same thing with signing as harvest and decrypt does with encrypted blobs, right? You sign something today, and in the future, somebody can defeat the signature, the signing event. That is the reason that it's imperative on us to move on these things and move quickly.
Great. I have got one more question. Can you summarize what steps my organization should take to be ready for quantum?
So, and Jason, feel free to jump in. I know I've been kind of hogging the questions. In the beginning, I think fact-finding is extremely important. So Jason and I talk a lot about a cryptographic bill of materials, or a CBOM. And that's to say, what is the cryptography we're using and where are we using it? And most organizations can't answer this question. They don't know. because cryptography is such a building block level technology. It's like saying, okay, the house you're sitting in, how many nails were used and where are they when it was built? Well, I don't know, right? There are nails. I'm pretty confident in that. I don't know where they are, right? And something similar with that to cryptography. So many people have so many hands in this jar over so much time that nobody really could say this is all the cryptography. But the problem with that is if you can't say this is all the cryptography, you can't upgrade all the cryptography, right? So what you really need to do is you need to figure that out. And that's what a cryptographic bill of materials is. Now, one of the things I like to say is where CBOM doesn't quite describe it correctly is it's not just a matter of understanding what's the cryptography and where is it. It's also a matter of understanding what's the level of upgradability. So what Jason talked about before, is this something where I can just slam a patch in easy as can be? Or is this something that's going to be very difficult? Well, we need to know that. What's the t-shirt size on the difficulty of that upgrade, right? That is a very important question that should be part of your CBOM. Another part of your CBOM is what is the value of these secrets and what's the longevity of these secrets? So short-term stuff that is not terribly valuable, my employees' vacation requests, will probably be a low priority, as opposed to industrial secrets that it took my company 30 years to develop that we're expecting to benefit us for the next 30 years, right? And when you put those things in perspective, it helps you understand how to prioritize. And all of that, I think, is part of the larger umbrella CBOM project. And that's the biggest thing we're recommending now, right? Is understand your cryptography. What do you have? Where is it? Think about discovery and discovery tools that will help you find that. Think about pulling those together into an interface, a reporting interface, a dashboarding interface, an alerting interface, so you can understand what's going on with those. That for most organizations, that is the job right now. And we've got a whole multi-stage plan that we get into. We've gotten into other webinars. We'll get into it again. I don't think there's time for that here, but at this point, think about discovery and categorization of your cryptography. You agree, Jay?
Yes, and on top of that, and you did mention it, inventory of the risks, inventory of the crown jewels that are being encrypted along with those cryptographic algorithms, Tim, because that will help you to prioritize.
Mm-hmm.
Great. One more question came in.
Okay.
Maybe we quickly have time for that too.
Sure.
Is there a way to test if an application is ready to use new cryptography?
What sort of. The best thing I would suggest is we actually have a cryptography sandbox that existing customers can go to, and they can get private root certs. They've got to be on a private root because public root certs aren't allowed yet. But private root certs that use the PQC standards, that use MLDSA. And what you can do is you can take those, put them in a dev environment, and start to simulate the real applications and systems that you really have. And that's a great way to prove that they're going to work or identify that they're not. And talk to your representative, your customer service rep or your enterprise sales rep about this. And we can get you set up with those, and we can get those in your hands today. And that is definitely a very good first start in terms of figuring out what works and what doesn't. Do you want to add to that, Jay?
That's great, Tim.
All right.
Great. And I think we've gone through all questions. Thank you everyone for your time, and thanks Tim and Jason. If you've got any more questions, do get in touch with us. We have another webinar that Tim already mentioned where we dive further into the Omdia report, this time with a focus on the 47-day certificates. It's coming up on September 30th, and you can sign up on our website. We'd love to see you there. But for now, thank you and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.